Polish-Lithuanian village, winter 1734. The wind screamed through the crooked chimneys of wooden huts, dragging with it the scent of smoke, mud, and something older, forgotten prayers and broken oaths. Snow did not fall here. It descended like ash, covering the earth in a silence thicker than death. In this part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, people had long stopped waiting for salvation. Empires rose and fell around them like tides, and the only throne they believed in was the one in heaven, if that. But one day a boy arrived, and with him came a story even the oldest man by the fire couldn't have invented. His name, depending on who you asked, was Jakub or Janusz, or, if you listened to the boy himself, Jakub the anointed, rightful heir to the throne of Poland. He came stumbling out of the eastern forests, half frozen, barefoot, with the posture of a saint and the hunger of a wolf. His voice trembled, but his words did not. He asked for no bread. He asked for attention. "I do not come for myself," he said, standing on a broken cart in the village square. "I come for Poland. I come for you." They laughed at first. Then they stopped. Poland in 1734 was a kingdom in name only, a shredded flag between Russia, Austria, and Prussia. After the death of King Augustus II, the country had plunged into chaos. Rival factions supported rival kings, some loyal to the French-backed Stanislav Leszczynski, others to Augustus III, a Saxon puppet. And between them, in villages like this, the people just wanted bread, safety, and someone to believe in. And now they had him. The boy was no older than 17, with light blonde hair matted from weeks in the woods, eyes too blue to be trusted, and hands that shook only when idle. He spoke perfect Polish with a strange cadence, like someone who had learned the language not from a mother, but from a tutor. And yet, his stories were biblical, his anger holy, and his promises intoxicating. "You think I'm the son of a carpenter? No, I am the grandson of a poisoned king, the last seed of the Jagiellonian blood. And I will not die until Poland is free from Moscow's poison and Saxony's rot." This wasn't rhetoric. This was revelation. The children followed him to the frozen river, where he recited verses from Scripture. Old women brought him broth and dry roots. Men sharpened axes, not for work, but in case the boy spoke of war. By the second week, he had over 40 followers, not peasants but disciples. Some of them built a wooden cross at the edge of the village. Others whispered that he healed a boy's fever by touch. Still others saw his footprints glow in the dark. The priest, a man who had long lost faith in the Vatican or Warsaw, simply watched. He did not bless the boy, but he did not curse him either. And then came the spy. His name is lost to history, but his scent remains, a mixture of wet leather, French cologne, and powder. He spoke German to the traders, Russian to the border guards, and Yiddish when it helped him blend in. When he saw the boy standing in the center of the square, surrounded by worshippers and woodcutters, he understood two things instantly. This boy was either insane or divine. Both were dangerous. "Who are you really?" he asked Jakub one frostbitten morning. "I am the one who comes when the throne is empty," the boy replied. "I do not sit where others sat. I sit where none have dared to look." The spy didn't report him to the Russians. Not yet. He smiled, because he knew, in Poland, all it takes is one madman to start a war. The boy was no longer just a whisper. He had become a signal. Rumors like frostbite spread from the limbs inward. By the time spring arrived, tales of the blonde prophet from the forest had reached places that snow could not. Inns, monasteries, and eventually, manor houses. One such manor stood just beyond the city of Lwów. It belonged to Count Wiktor Ray, a minor noble with major ambitions. Once a cavalry officer, now a recluse with gout and a crumbling estate, Ray had spent the last decade watching the Saxons rot Poland from the inside. He was the kind of man who looked at collapsing empires and saw opportunity. When word came of a young Messiah, gathering peasants and quoting scripture like thunder, Ray didn't laugh. He invited him. Jakub arrived at the manor gate not as a boy, but as something greater, a symbol that others had crafted around him. He now wore a long peasant's coat dyed with beet juice, boots borrowed from an old soldier, and a carved wooden medallion around his neck bearing a crude cross crown, his own design. Ray watched from the balcony as Jakub stepped into the courtyard. Behind him, nearly 50 followers, half-starved, half-fanatic. "Let me look at you," the Count said, descending the stairs slowly. His voice was a cracked cello string. "So you're the one causing so much noise." Jakub didn't bow. "I don't cause noise. I disturb silence that's lasted too long." That earned a smile. Inside the manor, they feasted barley, salted meat, and vodka that Jakub refused to touch. Ray asked the usual questions. "Where are you from? Who raised you? Do you truly believe you have royal blood?" And Jakub gave unusual answers. "I was raised by ashes. I come from the border where maps blur. And yes, I don't believe I am of the blood. I know it." The Count's curiosity shifted into calculation. His fingers drummed on the oak table. Poland was a bleeding animal. France wanted it limping. Russia wanted it bound. Saxony wanted it caged. But perhaps, just perhaps, someone wanted it unleashed again. And maybe that someone was a 17-year-old boy with a voice that could cut stone. "You'll stay here," Ray said. "I'll send letters." "To whom?" "To men who still believe in fire." Scroll the letters. Over the following weeks, messages were dispatched with care and coins to exiled monks, to mercenary captains, to disgraced bishops, to former Confederates still licking wounds from the last war. Each letter was sealed with race crest and a single line written in red ink. "There is a boy. He remembers what kings forgot." Not all believed, but enough were curious. A group of former Dominican friars arrived first, stripped of their robes, but not their faith. They questioned Jakub for hours. He quoted scripture without blinking. He described visions: fire rolling over Warsaw, a phoenix rising from the Vistula. One monk wept. Next came mercenaries, 3 scarred men who once fought in the War of Polish Succession. They expected a fraud. They left polishing their swords. Latin crossed the cross in the garden. It was during this time that the second miracle happened, or so they claimed. At dawn, Jakub walked into Ray's neglected garden. It was early April. The frost barely lifted the ground still iron. He knelt by a dying apple tree and pressed his palm against the bark. No one saw what happened. But that night the tree bloomed. By morning, petals covered the grass. A cross had been etched into the trunk. And from that moment on, his disciples began calling him not just Jakub, but the one who marks. The boy was now a flame too big to smother. Ray brought in a painter, a Hungarian who once decorated cathedral ceilings. He was paid in silver to paint Jakub's likeness. The portrait showed a serene face, slightly gaunt, with eyes gazing upward, and a ghostly golden crown hovering above his head. This image would later circulate through villages in southern Poland. Copies were etched in wood, scratched on church walls, and passed between revolutionaries. Jakub had gone from child to symbol, from orphan to claimant, from mistake to messiah. And just beyond the hills, Russia had begun to take notice. Vilnius, Lithuanian province, May 1734. The wax cracked before the seal did. A monk named Father Melchior, trembling with arthritis and suspicion, broke the red wax stamped with Count Ray's sigil. His cell smelled of candle smoke and mildew. Dust coated his holy books like ash. He had not received a letter in 7 years. He had not spoken aloud to another soul in 3. But the words inside the envelope made his lips part. "There is a boy. He remembers what kings forgot." He read it again, then a third time. And then, for the first time in nearly a decade, Father Melchior rose from his chair. Dove the whispering network. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was many things in 1734. Fractured, weakened, bleeding, but it still had veins. And Ray's letter, sent through couriers who knew every bend of every dirt road, traveled north like blood through those veins. In Vilnius, it reached the exiled Catholic Brotherhood. In Riga, it passed to a group of French Jacobites. In Poznan, it was read aloud in a smoky tavern full of former hussars. They didn't all believe the same story. Some said the boy was a miracle, child of a forgotten prince, baptized in secrecy and kept in hiding until the throne fell vacant. Others whispered he was a Russian plant, designed to distract. Still others, more superstitious, believed he was the wandering king, a messianic figure said to rise in Poland's darkest hour. And while the interpretations differed, one thing was clear. Jakub's name was now dangerous to speak aloud and impossible to ignore. Crossed towards a response from the east. In Smolensk, a Russian officer named Ivan Lukin received a different letter. This one intercepted. It was written hastily, with splotched ink and unsigned. The boy has reached Lwow. He has a noble sponsor. Monks are gathering. If you delay, he will be crowned. Lukin was not a man who panicked. He didn't believe in boy kings or prophecy, but he believed in disruption. Send 2 agents, he barked to his aide. No uniforms, no flags. If this boy draws breath by summer, I'll have your tongue. Russia wasn't ready for another uprising. Not when Sweden lingered in the north. Not when the Ottomans watched from the south. Fire back at the manor. Meanwhile, Jakub stood barefoot in Count Ray's courtyard, surrounded by mud and whispers. The air was warming, but something colder hung above the gathered men. Expectation. 2 Dominican friars had arrived the night before, sent from Vilnius. They didn't speak. They judged. One by one, they questioned his followers. They inspected his room. They examined the cross on the apple tree. Then, they turned to Jakub. "Do you claim divinity?" asked the elder, his voice ablade. "No," Jakub answered. "I claim purpose." "Do you seek the crown?" "I seek to restore what the crown has forgotten." The younger friar stepped forward, his eyes darting. "Perform a sign. For the people." Jakub's breath caught. He glanced at Ray, who nodded, not gently, but with the silent pressure of a man investing heavily. That night, they brought a mute boy before him. The child's name was Leon. He hadn't spoken since his father died in a fire 2 winters ago. No medicine, no priest had helped. Jakub kneeled and placed his hands on the boy's head. "You do not have to speak," he whispered. "Only remember what it feels like to be heard." Silence. Then a gasp. "Mama," the boy said. Quiet, hoarse, trembling. The crowd fell to its knees. Some wept. Even the friars could not speak. Jakub didn't smile. He merely turned to the cross in the garden and whispered something no one heard. Snake eyes in the shadows. But not all eyes were faithful. Among the crowd that night stood a man with no name, only a scar down his jaw and a Russian-made dagger tucked inside his belt. He had arrived 3 days earlier, posing as a stonemason. He watched Jakub not with wonder, but calculation. This was no prophet. This was leverage. And as the people prayed, and the boy who once wandered now stood framed in candlelight like a saint in flesh, the agent turned from the firelight and whispered to the wind. "He bleeds. That's all I need." Eastern Carpathians, June 1734. The carriage bounced violently as it crossed the old mountain pass. No guards, no banners, only a single torch burning on the side, marking the hidden road. Inside sat Jakub, silent. His hands were wrapped in linen, not from injury, from ritual. Beside him sat Father Melchior, older now than in his Vilnius monastery, and yet more alive. The letter he had received in spring had reignited something long buried. He had chosen to accompany the boy, not as a priest, not as a believer, but as a witness. "Do you understand what they'll ask of you?" the priest finally asked. Jakub didn't answer immediately. His breath fogged the window. Outside, the stars looked cold and sharp. "Yes," he said, "they want proof. Not of my blood, but of my will." Castle the Gathering at Zamek Zarna. The old castle ruins, once called Zamek Zarna, were nestled deep in the mountains, a place used by insurgents, exiles, and fanatics across centuries. That night, the fires lit within its walls cast shadows long enough to touch history. There were 11 nobles gathered, all displaced, all dangerous. Among them, Count Kazimierz Albrecht, who had fought against Saxon troops during the War of Succession. Lady Regina Dluska, whose lands had been annexed by Austrian forces. The broken but sharp-eyed Duke Andrei Rzewuski, who once dined with French kings and now chewed dry bark instead of bread. They were not kings, but they remembered kingship. When Jakub entered the hall, they did not bow, nor did he. Silence settled like dust. A raven cawed in the ruined rafters. "You say you are heir to the crown," Rzewski finally said. "Then we ask you to prove it." Jakub stood before them, hands still wrapped. "How? Not by paper, not by prophecy, by the test of thrones. Fire the trial." The test of thrones was old, older than Poland itself. It was not about bloodlines or politics. It was about pain. Jakub was stripped to the waist and led into the inner chamber. There, before a stone altar, sat a ceremonial iron rod, heated over a coal pit until it glowed white. The rules were simple. Hold the rod with both hands. Speak your true name aloud. Do not cry out. If you screamed, you were false. If you lied, your skin would blister. If you endured, even if broken, they would believe. Father Melchior tried to stop them. "This is pagan madness," he hissed. "No crown is worth a child's flesh." But the nobles didn't listen, and neither did Jakub. He stepped forward. The hall was silent, but for the crackle of flame and the distant howling wind. Jakub kneeled, placed his hands above the rod, and whispered, "I am Jakub, son of Nun, seed of the broken throne, voice of the drowned king. I do not claim what was. I take what must be." He grasped the rod. The hiss was instant, like water against steel. His lips quivered. His body shook. But he did not scream. He dropped the rod after 6 seconds. Smoke curled from his palms. The floor caught his knees. Blood spotted the stones. But the hall was still silent. Then, a single, hoarse voice, Rzewski. "He holds a throne. Crown the crown and the warning." Later that night, in a smaller chamber, the nobles placed before Jakub an old silver circlet, once belonging to a regional voivode. It was more symbol than regalia, but they held it like it mattered. He refused it. "I'll wear no crown until Poland wears pride again." They liked that. They liked it too much, because now they were not just seeing a tool, but a figurehead. Dagger, a blade in the dark. But not all were loyal. In the hall's rafters, just beyond the candlelight, the Russian agent moved like a shadow. He had planned poison. He had prepared a forged letter of confession, a betrayal letter, a weapon disguised as mercy. But he had not expected to hesitate. He watched Jakub's burned hands, watched as the boy wrapped his own fingers with linen, watched as the nobles bowed their heads in silence, the silence of conspirators. And in that moment, the agent knew this was no longer a child with delusions. This was now a revolution with a face. And he whispered to himself, "Too late." Southern Lowlands, late summer, 1734. The field outside Ostro should have been empty. Instead, it boiled with bodies. They came from every direction. Farmers with mud-stained feet, old soldiers with rusted sabers, barefoot monks, beggars, millers, mothers with infants tied to their backs. Some marched, some limped. All came with a name on their tongues. Jakub. By September, his legend had eclipsed borders. Word of the burned hand boy spread faster than plague. His face was now carved into wooden icons. His name had been stitched into prayer flags. They called him the young eagle in Wieliczka, saint of ashes in Podolia, the true king in whispered tones where Saxon ears might listen. He had not yet taken a throne, but he no longer needed to crown the people's coronation. It was not noblemen, not bishops, but the people who crowned him. In a clearing ringed by pine and mud, a simple wooden platform was erected. Jakub stood atop it, his linen robes soaked with sweat. His burned hands, though still healing, were unbandaged, scars visible, red and raw. Thousands stood in silence. No priest dared officiate. No cardinal dared attend. But one child stepped forward. A boy, no older than 10, trembling, clutching a simple wreath of wildflowers. He placed it on Jakub's head, and the crowd erupted. Long live Jakub, the last crown for the last king. Glory to the hands that burn. Jakub did not raise his arms. He did not smile. He simply nodded. The weight of the crown, however light, pressed deeper than iron. Scroll the edicts. Within days, declarations were issued, handwritten on coarse parchment and nailed to doors of taverns and churches. They carried the seal of Count Ray and the crude emblem of Jakub's cross crown. All Saxon taxes are hereby void. Land seized by Austrian force is to be returned. The language of Poland will be spoken in courts, crossed towards the Saxon response. From Krakow came the first blow. A Saxon regiment, led by Colonel Lube, was dispatched to restore local order. They expected resistance, pitchforks, stones, maybe rusted sabers. They did not expect over 800 armed volunteers, waiting at the forest edge under Jakub's black and red banner. The battle at Las Grobowy lasted 4 hours. It was not victory, but it was not defeat, and that made it dangerous. When the Saxon troops pulled back, limping and bloodied, the message was clear. The rebellion was real. Hold the first betrayal. The camp was feverish with hope after the battle. Jakub, though exhausted, walked the lines, touching the wounded, speaking blessings, eating from the same pot as common men. And then a knife. It came not from a Saxon, but from within, a member of his inner circle. A former monk named Tomasz the Pale was found dead in the woods, a letter clutched in his fist. It was a confession. He had been secretly working for Austrian agents, feeding them maps, names, troop counts. He had planned to poison Jakub's bread the following night. Jakub read the letter aloud by torchlight. Then, instead of fury, he whispered, "They will not kill me with knives. They will kill me with doubt." Chart decreasing, the cracks widen. Ray called for executions. Melchior called for penance. The soldiers called for purges. The peasants called for food. And Jakub? He sat in his tent, hands trembling. The crown of flowers had withered. His feet bled. His voice, once thunder, now cracked in mid-sentence. He had seen the top, and now it was crumbling beneath him, near the ruins of Tarnow. October 1734. The leaves were dying. Red, yellow, brown. They fell around the camp like slow-moving warnings, flags of a nature preparing to sleep. But Jakub could not rest. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. He no longer walked without help. His hands, once scarred with devotion, now trembled with exhaustion. His food was tasted before it reached him. His circle, once full of voices, now sat mostly in silence. And yet the people still came. They still gathered outside his tent, begging for direction, for war, for bread, for salvation. He gave them only quiet. Dagger the meeting at Black Hollow. It was Ray who proposed the secret summit. A final move, he told Jakub, before Saxony strikes again. A gathering of allies, minor nobles, partisan commanders, even a Prussian envoy, allegedly sympathetic to Jakub's cause, would meet in Black Hollow, a secluded grove surrounded by high cliffs. Secrecy, they said, was essential. Jakub hesitated. What if it's a trap? Then it's a very expensive one, Ray replied dryly. Because I'm walking into it with you. Jakub agreed. Wolf faced the ambush. The ride to Black Hollow was tense. Jakub rode with Ray and 2 bodyguards, one limping from the Battle of Las Grobowy, the other an ex-thief turned believer. They spoke little. As they entered the clearing, the silence was unnatural. The envoys were already there, a dozen figures in gray, cloaks, faces veiled. And then a whistle, too sharp, too rehearsed. Back! Ray shouted, but it was too late. Arrows flew from the trees. One hit Jakub's horse. Another struck the guard in the throat. Ray pulled Jakub behind a fallen log as masked men closed in from all sides. They knew. Ray spat, drawing his sword. Someone told them. Drop of blood, the fall of the flame. Jakub tried to run, but his legs buckled beneath him. His burned feet had split open again from the ride. He crawled behind the stones. One of the masked men raised his blade and paused. He's just a boy. He's more than that. Another hissed. He's a symbol. Zymbolstitol. And then Ray charged. He didn't scream, didn't call for God. He simply slashed through the first 2 with the fury of a man who'd waited 20 years to matter again. He was stabbed 3 times. And still, he stood long enough to buy Jakub 15 seconds. Jakub ran. Into the trees. Into the dark. Alone. Coffin aftermath. By morning, the bodies were found by villagers. Jakub was gone. Ray was dead. The attackers, unidentified, stripped of all insignias, had vanished like ghosts. The rebellion camp waited. 3 days, then 4, then 5. No word came. Some believed Jakub had died. Others believed he had ascended, vanished into legend, to return at Poland's darkest hour. Father Melchior tried to hold the remnants together. He will return, he told the people. Kings do not die in forests. They sleep. But winter was coming, and with it doubt. Kindle the fire that burned alone. In a monastery far from the war camps, a traveler arrived days later. Hooded, barefoot, mute. He asked for sanctuary. The monks took him in. They treated his feet, fed him, let him sleep. Only one noticed the scar on his palm, shaped like a melted crown. The traveler never gave a name, but he carved a small cross into the stone windowsill of his room. He wept at night, and each morning he whispered, "Not yet, not yet." Warsaw, winter 1740. 6 years later, the city had changed. The banners were Saxon now, dull blue with golden eagles that meant nothing to the hungry. The throne was occupied, the borders redrawn. The rebellion, they said, had been extinguished like a bad dream. But in smoky taverns and behind church altars, the name Jakub still lingered, half whisper, half prayer. Children played games called The Boy King Escapes. Soldiers carve his initials into barracks walls before battle. A folk song, The Hands That Burn for Us, was banned in Krakow and sung louder every week. The state had crushed the body, but could not kill the idea. Snake the counter-legend. In royal courts and foreign embassies, the Saxon crown worked tirelessly to rewrite the past. They labeled Jakub a charlatan. They said he was a Russian experiment gone rogue. They claimed he had died of fever in a monastery, a quiet death for a failed boy. They published pamphlets filled with woodcuts of a snarling adolescent in chains. They turned his miracles into clever tricks, his followers into gullible peasants, his voice into plagiarized scripture. And yet, for every pamphlet distributed, 2 more carvings of his likeness appeared on village crosses. Writing hand, the testimony of Melchior. Before his death, Father Melchior wrote a final letter, a long, trembling scroll delivered in secret to a monastery in Gdansk. He was not a king by blood, nor a saint by right, but he carried the weight of both. And when the world asked him to rule with fire, he chose to burn alone. He described the trial, the betrayal, and the final moments in Black Hollow. He did not name the monastery where Jakub fled, only said he lives not as a monarch, but as a man unburdened. Crowned the rise of imitators. In 1742, a man claiming to be Jakub resurrected appeared near Lublin. He healed a woman's blindness with oil. He walked barefoot through snow without injury, and he was executed within a week by Saxon troops. In 1745, a new sect emerged in the East, the Church of the Broken Crown. They carried burned wooden icons, fasted for 6 days each month, and believed that Jakub would return on the 7th spring of Poland's darkest hour. By 1750, 3 separate uprisings used his name as their banner cry. Jakub the Boy King had become something far more dangerous than a monarch. He had become an immortal possibility. Candle final scene, the monastery and the flame. Unmarked monastery, unknown region, date uncertain. The monk entered the cold stone room with his daily bread and water. The occupant was already awake, sitting by the window, still barefoot, still silent, but now older. The blonde hair faded into silver. The fire in his eyes, no longer wild, but watchful. The monk placed a tray down and turned to leave. "They still speak of you," he said softly. The man did not answer, but his fingers tapped 3 times on the wooden sill, a rhythm known only to the priesthood and a long-dead count. The monk smiled. "Will you ever return?" The man looked to the horizon, where clouds drifted like torn silk. And then, finally, his voice hoarse and distant. "Only if they forget." He stood, walked to the window, and watched the snow fall like ashes, just as it did all those years ago when he had first stepped out of the forest. Checkered flag, epilogue. He never wore a real crown, never sat on a throne, never ruled a kingdom. But for a moment, he united a fractured land, not with power, but with possibility. And long after kings are forgotten, and borders rewritten and monuments toppled, possibility lives on.